welcome to today's training. This is for parents of young children, teenagers, as well as young adults who are suffering from anxiety. We're going to be talking about the parental skills involved in helping this next generation be more resilient with the stressors that this world provides. Modern children and young adults, they are so loved, cherished, protected, empowered, but a lot of us are also noticing that they are quite anxious. This next generation does have an intolerance of discomfort. While this is not true of everybody in the younger generation, we are noticing as a trend that as parents, we are raising children who are a little bit less able to cope with the stressors of the real world. And some modern scientists and therapists believe that our parenting styles are partially responsible for this shift for our young ones. Modern parenting does breed some anxiety disorders. During this time, when we are giving our child a comfortable and safe and pleasant childhood, we are also creating some negative distortions that life is comfortable, life is safe and pleasant, when we all know that there are many instances when we have to tolerate as human beings things not going well. The negative distortions can cause young adults and children to believe that they are a victim of their circumstances rather than necessarily see themselves as empowered during difficult challenges. So anxiety is fundamentally a vague sense that we are unsafe. Anxiety does not necessitate danger. So we can feel very anxious and actually be completely safe. Anxiety is all about anticipation. So if there's some sort of change or challenge, your child might be anticipating that they are not going to be capable or safe. And in that situation, they will feel far more anxious than a person that believes that they can do hard things. I would love if us therapists could stop pathologizing all difficult situations and labeling them trauma. Many of us are starting to notice that too much emphasis on trauma in the therapy room actually leads to more of a victim mentality. Struggle during childhood made many of us adults who we are today. And that resilience can sometimes not be learned in other situations. I would like to address the myth of little t trauma. The definition of trauma is not just a difficult experience. Trauma is something that persists in the consciousness. Trauma has long-term adverse events. Something that was uncomfortable, unpleasant, scary, those are not necessarily trauma. Trauma, as Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote Body Keeps the Score, is not just an event. It's also an imprint on the brain and the body. This imprint has ongoing consequences for how the human organism survives in the present. So to give an example, a difficult experience is something like a bee sting. It hurts, it's bad. No long-term hardship follows. A traumatic experience might be a bee sting that causes anaphylaxis. That memory of not being able to breathe might be something that plagues your nightmares after the occurrence. That would be a trauma experience that needs to be worked through in therapy. The difficult experience does not need to be persisted upon. It doesn't need to be turned over and over in the brain. And in fact, sometimes if we overthink something that is a difficult experience, we can make it more traumatic in the memory of it. So I'd like to introduce you to a fictional client named Molly. Molly is deeply loved. Whenever she feels scared, her parents respond and soothe. They live in a small mountain town in Colorado and sometimes experience severe weather. Molly got caught in a storm at age 3, and now, when there is even a single cloud in the sky, she will refuse to leave her house. Her parents don't force her to leave on windy days, and she ends up missing a lot of preschool. It's quite windy up here in Colorado. Molly's parents have stopped going out at night because Molly doesn't feel safe with the babysitter. They won't travel because the stress of sleeping in a new place will probably trigger Molly's panic. Lately, they've been doing a good night routine with her, which seems to help her calm down and sleep as long as they do the ritual perfectly. Her parents take her to a play therapist, but she only seems to be getting more anxious. What now? This is a typical case that we see at our center that got transferred from another play facility that actually is not specializing in anxiety. What I would immediately notice about Molly's case is that her life appears to be getting smaller. Her window of tolerance appears to be getting smaller. As her parents accommodate her fears, she seems to have less and less resilience to these challenges. Molly's parents need to be coached even more than Molly does because their participation in the fear cycle is actually reinforcing. Modern parenting can breed anxiety disorders because of our errors of overavailability, our deep fears of hurting our children emotionally, which again can start with a good energy and go too far. We are, as a generation of parents, prioritizing connection over correction, which starts with positive interactions. But what ends up happening is that we are not as strong of a leader or guide to our children as we are a friend. We end up empowering our children's viewpoints quite a bit, which leads to accommodating their anxiety. Remember, when a child has a severe anxiety disorder, sometimes you're actually interacting with their anxiety and not with your child. They are advocating for what they view to be safety rather than advocating for challenges, doing hard things that are going to push them out of their comfort zone. Protecting children from bad outcomes causes our children to have less resilience. Pushing them out of their comfort zone, yes, of course, it feels very scary. It feels scary, honestly, more than anything for us parents, because we don't want to see our child struggle. But our children need to struggle. They need to struggle to be able to survive in this world. They need to struggle as children in order to be able to be resilient, emotionally tolerant adults. We are too available as parents. So those of us who were raised in the 80s or the 90s, we know that it was almost impossible to get a hold of your working parents. You had to have a quarter, you had to find a payphone. Yes, it was annoying, of course, but many of us had the experience of waiting alone for a long period of time and figuring it out, right? Um, when modern parents go out and walk our dogs, or when we go to the grocery store, our children can get a hold of us at any point. This is so much availability. Well, we have kiddos that are texting and calling their parents from schools, and school systems really frustrated at parents' over availability. This leads to reliance. This leads to our children expecting to be rescued. It does actually lead us as parents to be doing too much problem solving for our child rather than encouraging them towards independent problem solving. And then, of course, in those moments when we are unavailable, when we're in a meeting or a doctor's appointment and our child can't get a hold of us, they tend to panic. They tend to see that as an expectation at all times. I have actually normalized having my ringer on silent. I would never answer the phone while I'm in session with another client. And so when my children have an expectation of being able to reach me, it actually makes me do a much worse job at my profession. We do fear hurting our child emotionally. So a lot of us modern parents, we did have some emotional damage in our own childhoods. And yes, I agree, we want to avoid repeating these cycles with our own children. However, if we're walking on eggshells with our child's emotions, we're tiptoeing around their emotions, that will lead to them expecting that others will do the same. We don't want our child overreacting to emotional harm. And therefore, we can't always be so gentle so that our child expects that from others. We don't want our child to believe that emotional harm means that a relationship is toxic. We want them to believe that emotional harm happens in relationships, and it makes relationships sometimes difficult, sometimes a struggle, and sometimes a place where you need to self-advocate. But the label of toxic should not be placed on a relationship just because there is some negative emotional experience. Remember that emotional struggle leads to emotional growth. The most productive family sessions I have ever had are the ones in which there was such a rawness and pain for the family that finally we cracked open some incredible insights that had been withheld in the first place. Connection can't always be more important than correction. I get this. I too really deeply want to be liked. I want my children to have only positive things to say about me and vice versa, but that is not realistic. Our children need us to correct them as parents. That is such a big part of our role. In some ways, we're our child's first, quote, boss. If we are complimenting them when they do a sloppy job washing the dishes, we are mistakenly reinforcing a belief that they are excellent when they haven't actually earned that. We need to be able to correct our child, not too much, but for them to be able to be resilient to criticism and to have realistic expectations of how authority figures will react when they do make mistakes. It is absolutely not necessary to correct with unkindness or to correct in an emotional manner, but matter-of-factly utilizing correction as a way to give parental guidance, which is sorely needed. We cannot always prioritize our child's viewpoint. If we make our child overconfident, we might actually make them more anxious. It's a central irony that confidence that's not matched with real expertise will cause anxiety. Our children are still learning, and it's important that their viewpoints be questioned. If their viewpoints are never questioned, then they're not necessarily learning perspective taking. They're not learning as much tolerance of other viewpoints. And also a very fundamental lesson of humility for the wisdom of people that are older than you. That's something that they, when learned, will cherish throughout the lifetime. A lot of young people naturally have polarized thinking. This is black or white thinking. It is a common cognitive distortion, which leads us to think there's just right and wrong, my view and the wrong view. These types of distortions actually lead to anxiety. Encourage your child to instead soften strong views. Accommodations for our child's anxiety ultimately snowball. The more we help our child avoid fear triggers, the more they will fear. This is a universal aspect of of accommodating, I do not mean this in terms of neurodiversity accommodations, but rather the accommodations that we make where we help our child avoid things that scare them, avoid things that challenge them. The only way to desensitize to a fear trigger is through repeated exposure to that trigger. There's no way for us to actually treat a fear without introducing that fear at least a little bit into a child's world. We want to encourage facing up against things that are intimidating to us. We don't want to be encouraging avoidance or making our child's world smaller. We want to teach children that anxiety is tolerable. It is a part of real lives. When we protect our children too much, we are, in fact, robbing them of opportunities for learning. Remember that nature's way of developing the brain is for us to experience many outcomes, some of them bad. Overprotected children will be receiving this message: you can't deal with this, you need me. A child who gets used to a parent coming in and saving them will expect that in other phases of their life. Allow your child to have natural consequences. When you burn yourself, you learn a healthy respect for fire. In life as well, when we experience something firsthand, we actually learn that lesson much more deeply, much more fundamentally than if it is explained to us and we have no actual experience. So Molly's parents decide to find a parenting coach. We are really honored when parents decide that, you know what, the strategies that we've been using for our child's anxiety don't seem to be working. I wonder if maybe I can be part of the solution. Empowered parenting is a solution to childhood anxiety. Empowered parenting helps parents recenter their priorities and support their child in expanding their experiences to include things that really are intimidating for them. Molly's parents rediscover their own power and they stop allowing their family to be controlled by Molly's anxiety. They go away for the weekend. They learn that allowing Molly to avoid her fear triggers, they're actually making her more reliant, hesitant, and stuck. Molly's parents, after parental training, are no longer tiptoeing around Molly's anxiety. In the short term, of course, there are more tears, more tantrums, more panic. However, as she gains experiences coping with more challenges, she starts to really believe in herself and know that even if it's unpleasant, she can do it. Everyone's life gets bigger again. Thank you so much for allowing me to bring you down this path of empowered parenting. We are encouraging all parents to take a look at how our behavior is actually affecting the development of our child's anxiety disorder. Thank you.